Welcome to Living by Faith, your bright spot to your Saturday morning. I'm your host, Trillia Newbell, and I should note that today's show is taped. As always, you can email me at livingbyfaith@moody.edu. I'd love to hear from you. Again, it's livingbyfaith@moody.edu. So Christmas is just around the corner. I love this holiday. I really like that even though festivities ramp up, overall, life does kind of slow down. I know that's probably for some of you, you're thinking, what is she talking about? But it does. It kind of slows down a little bit, or you get to refocus. I love that we get focused time to reflect on Jesus, if we're willing. And I'd say that it really can be the most wonderful time of the year. But I also know that we can get distracted by the consumer aspects of the holiday to the detriment of the main thing. Gifts can become so important that we are willing to go into debt just to get that right thing, whatever we think is that right thing. Serving becomes such a duty that we walk around demanding our way and getting frustrated. We've got to be honest with ourselves. The season is also filled with angst at times. It can be, at least for many of us. And here's the thing. Our kids, they are watching us. They are learning. They are taking our cues about this season and what it means. They see, it's pretty amazing how much they reflect us often and what they are absorbing and learning. Now, here's the good news. If we mess up here, if we are all over the place, we can ask God to forgive us. We go before a throne of grace. There's absolutely no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And I hope that you fully understand that. But I also hope that we kind of do some real evaluating and asking our hearts, okay, where have we really been focused? Where, year after year, what have we been focusing on? And maybe this year can be different. I believe so. I believe that is capable, that God is capable and willing and able and wants us to ask our hearts the hard question, turn where we've gone wrong, and run to Him and help us to really focus on Jesus. Here's some more good news. We can learn how to teach our kids about this season, and we have people who have created tools to help us. Clayton Green and Chris Papalardo are pastors, parents, and friends turned business partners who are committed to helping families cultivate spiritual practices in the home. Through tangible products, coaching church leaders, and their blog, podcast, and book, Clayton and Chris are helping families across the country create meaningful moments in the home as they engage with God and one another. Clayton and Chris, welcome to the show.
So excited to be here, Trillia. Thanks for having us.
I'm pumped, Trillia. Good to talk to you again.
Yes, absolutely. It is such a joy. And I cannot remember how I first learned about your product. I think I was probably subscribed. That's it. I was subscribed to your newsletter, I believe. And I loved it. I loved what I was learning. Now, I will admit that I haven't used the Advent blocks because my kids, by the time, and this probably is a lame excuse, but by the time I learned about them, I've got an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old, and they were probably 16, just a little older. And so I want us to talk a little bit more about the products and the age range and when we should start, or if I'm wrong and I should have been doing it with my teenagers. But before we dive into that, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your heart behind The Good Kind, which is a ministry and a company, and how you all even got to know each other and start this. Where did you begin?
Oh gosh, well, to go back to that story of where we began, Trillia, I remember that because I mean, just a fan for just a minute. I'm so flattered to be here talking to you because we have been helped by you and your work, your writing before we actually got connected. So when we found out that you were on the email list, we all kind of had like a screaming fest. We were all really excited,
Oh,
and then we ended up getting connected and talking a little bit more, and so that's how we got connected, and I very much remember that story. Chris and I, we've been at the same church for a long, long time. We're both an undergrad in the Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina a long, long time ago now. We went to rival colleges, UNC versus Duke, go Tar Heels. So we kind of, I was aware of Chris in college, but then it wasn't until maybe 10 years later that we got connected and started working on some projects together. That's how we became friends, right, Chris?
Yeah. You had spent some time with one of our church plants down in Wilmington, and it's when you came back to the area, we reconnected, being on the same staff. But it went from kind of good acquaintance, friendship to super deep when a few years ago when we encountered this problem with Advent and Christmas, and you were like, I have an idea. I think you can help me execute it. And that's how all of this started and why we're spending tons of time every day together at this point.
so it's pretty incredible how an idea turned into a a business. So it sounds like Chris is saying, okay, Chris was initially Clayton's idea but what was the idea? Was the idea the Advent blocks? Was the idea the organization? And how did that, and what inspired it? Was it your own family?
Yeah, well, to kind of go back to what you were saying about the show in general is we were the basis of our relationship, having been at the same church, but then also this other deeper work that we were doing together, is figuring out how to walk out our faith, right? And
Yeah.
oftentimes, many times, most times, you have companions on that spiritual journey. And Chris and I were already companions on that spiritual journey, trying to figure out what is it we need to do in order to walk closer with God and navigate, all the ups and downs of life. So add in then a conversation that my then 5-year-old had with me and my wife, Kristen. She said, Mommy and Daddy, you say that Christmas is all about Jesus, but it feels like Christmas is all about presents. Now, this was
Ooh.
2018
Yeah.
on December 23rd. I had nothing. We could do nothing else other than open the presents and just say, what are we going to do next year? And so it was the following
Yeah.
year that my wife and I were looking for different options that would kind of rival the presents in our home and really help our kids kind of bring an alignment to what we were saying to our kids Christmas was about and what their experience was that Christmas was actually about. And so I did come up with a way for some of these blocks to move and to kind of tell the story, make it as a decoration in the center of the home. But I'm not an author. And so that's when I messaged Chris and I was like, hey, Chris, can you help me out with this and write some stories that will be this new Advent guide that I'm trying to create for my family? And Chris, pretty much on the spot, it was just like, yeah.
That's amazing. It's interesting. I did not talk to you guys about how you got started um, before the show, and I think it's interesting and kind of encouraging that I started the show with kind of that same scenario. I think so many of us get really focused on gifts or get really focused on parties and the busyness or the spirit, like the holiday spirit without the Holy Spirit, without Jesus, And so I think that's so many of us would say, yep, been there, done that. So, Chris, you're a pastor at heart, you're a writer. How would you encourage someone who's listening and they just think, I've blown it. Half the time I'm angry. I'm frustrated. I want it to be this perfect thing. And that's where my focus is. How would you encourage their hearts?
Yeah, I mean, I would say part of the beauty of this Advent Blocks resource we created is that we don't think we need to do away with all of the things that make the Christmas season exciting that aren't about Jesus, that we really can have both happening. It's okay to look forward to the presents. It's okay to have that anticipation there.
Yeah.
It's okay to love Christmas treats and all that. That doesn't mean you've blown it. And on Christmas Day, the only win is, well, my kid has got to wake up saying, "Do you know what today's about, Daddy? It's about the incarnation and nothing else." Like, it's
Yeah.
just not a realistic thing. So you can kind of ride the wave of both and take moments that are already there where you're together as a family and say, there can be a spiritual thing happening here. We can ride that anticipation and turn it back towards something that is godly. And the other thing is, I mean, honestly, we're not living in a religion that says the only way you can pass this on to your children is if you do this perfectly. That's so much of a burden, and a lot of us
Yes.
carry that. We need to model for our kids what it looks like to say, "Hey, you know what? I wanted this to be true in our home, and it wasn't. Can we try again? Can we do this a little better?" Because that's a posture of grace, and we want our kids to embody that. And they catch that when we say, "I was wrong. Let's try that again." So the "I was wrong" moments are actually a good catalyst for us to show our kids what it means to be walking in a religion of grace.
I
Yeah,
love
absolutely.
that. Go ahead, Clayton.
No, I was gonna say, like, we say commonly to each other, like, we need to forgive ourselves, where you know, Jesus gives the Pharisees a really, really hard time in the Bible, right? Because they're adding things they were putting expectations on people that he wasn't putting on them. And I think that sometimes when it comes to spiritual practice or living our spiritual lives with our families, we can either take people from the outside, and that is a pressure on us, but also we can put that pressure on ourselves.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk more about this when we return. Welcome back to Living by Faith with Trillia Newbell. And I am talking with the creators and owners, I'm not really sure, of The Good Kind. And we are talking about grace really right now. So I'm with Clayton Green and Chris Pappalardo. And before the break, you all were talking about how it's easy for us to put pressure on ourselves either way. So we can be put pressure to have this perfect Christmas season, or we can put pressure because we haven't talked about Jesus enough. And I do love, one, that there's grace, that we start there, that we don't have to prove ourselves in either of those situations, that we can rest in Jesus. We can rest. But I also love that you have said that it can be both and. It doesn't have to be either or. And I do love that, because I do think that sometimes we're pendulum swingers, so we like rules in general, and to know that we're doing it right, and to say to those who maybe love to celebrate the season of Christmas that you can it's a freeing thing. It's freeing. So how are ways that you've helped families to incorporate both the fun and delight of just the holiday season with the fun and delight of focusing on Jesus?
Yeah, I think the phrase that we like to use to balance that tension or that pendulum that you're talking about is grace-filled practice. Like, what we're looking for is grace-filled practice. You can forgive yourself, but also it's practice. And then even the term of practice insinuates that it's something that you're not perfect at yet, and that somebody who is very new to the faith can join us. and that someone who's been in the faith for a really long time is still practicing, because we're not yet perfect. And so I think looking for grace-filled practice is what we are looking for. And in general, the products that we create, the tangible things that we are providing our families and that we provide other families, are meant to playfully, tangibly draw people back and remind them of engaging with God. Because we think if we are reminding people to engage with God, that the power of God is actually going to come and bear fruit in their life. And with Advent blocks, it kind of does those things. It is a tangible thing that sits on a mantle, and it actually brings you back. Turning the block each day and reading the stories has an incredibly powerful effect on helping us be more consistent in this grace-filled practice of understanding the story of the Bible, particularly as it focuses at Christmas or Easter or whatever the time is of the year.
So tell us about the Advent blocks. We've talked kind of around them, but for those who have no idea what we're talking about, what is it?
Advent blocks is a 25-day Christmas practice that helps kids and parents focus on Jesus. So there's 25 blocks that you line up in a row, numbered 1 through 25, on a mantle or on a bookshelf or on a kitchen counter if need be. There's a star that goes on one end and an earth block that goes on the other end. And every day you turn the one to reveal an image in order to that corresponds to a story that is in the book, and the star moves to sit on top of the next day. And so gradually you see that star moving across the top of the blocks and getting closer to the earth, representing God coming to earth to stay. And Chris wrote the guide, day 1 through day 25, to actually go through the entire Bible, starting with Adam and Eve and then culminating in Christ's birth. And it tells the story of God's presence with his people. And God's continual pursuit of being with his people. It's incredibly tangible, and families end up being really, really consistent because the blocks really kind of engage the kids.
That is, I really love that. And I love that you were inspired by your own family. I often tell people that this story of how my first kid's book, God's Very Good Idea, it was birthed from me writing a Sunday school lesson for my church. I was asked to teach the younger kids about God and the image of God, and I just wrote something. I wasn't thinking, oh, this is going to help hundreds of thousands of people one day. I was just being faithful in my local church, and how we can be faithful in our local, wherever it is, in our homes, in our church, in our community, and the Lord use it, I think is pretty remarkable. Now, you all call it Advent blocks. So is it meant to start on Advent, or is it really just the 25 days of Christmas?
Yeah, we actually did a lot of research kind of after the fact to figure out what strictly Advent is supposed to be, how you market and all this, because people who know the term Advent or maybe familiar with the 4 Sundays leading up to Christmas. And the struggle that Clayton and I had, we were actually doing Advent practices the year that his daughter told him, hey, Christmas doesn't seem like it's about Jesus. Something about that weekly rhythm, we just had a hard time doing it. It was difficult to remember. We lost steam. So inevitably, we had these high aspirations of doing the weekly Advent thing. And our kids would be bored by it. It would drive us nuts. And so we came back and said, all right, the goal of Advent is to build anticipation for the coming of Jesus. How do you do that with a 6-year-old whose attention span is short and who forgot what we did last week, because that was 7 days ago, and that's in their life? What even happened back then? So that's why we took it and said, we could still do the Advent anticipation and just have it be the 25 days of December. And there's actually a history of kind of Advent calendars as well, of doing 25 days sorts of things. It's not as big in the liturgical world. But that was us saying, look, if we want to do this, like you said, Trillia, I really want my kid to be excited about the coming of Jesus. How do I do that for a 6-year-old? Well, it's probably got to be super short, and it's probably got to be every night, because that's how we do it.
So every night, actually, let's talk about that kind of practice and the habit of spiritual formation in the home and how we build, because I don't know why I hadn't thought about this, what you just said, Chris, but it is this every night idea does instill something that becomes ingrained and a part of the culture of the home. So was that intentional? And are there other things that you have done or that you would suggest that parents do?
Yeah, I think there's something. I mean, here's the deal. When you have little kids, every night you've got to figure out how you're going to get them from bouncing off the walls to peacefully sleeping in their bed. And hopefully you have some sort of rhythm or routine to end the day. That's a natural moment to say, can we incorporate something into this routine, which as a parent, I mainly need so that you will go to sleep and I can get some sanity. But can I incorporate something else in that routine that says, by the way, you are made in God's image, rest in his love tonight. And, here's a little download from the Bible. So a lot of what we do at Good Kind is just taking rhythms that already exist and saying, well, let's see, you eat meals every day already. You try to put your kids to bed every day already. Is there some way to take that moment, which you're already doing, and to add a little bit of a turn towards Jesus and grace so that it's part of the rhythm rather than, well, let's add a new thing onto an already packed and full and busy schedule?
One of the things that I love when I'm listening to that is that, okay, so here at Living by Faith, what I'm hoping and trying to do in my own life and trying to encourage others to do is to take God at his word and live our lives accordingly. So trust God, obey God, ask God for help. We can't do it on our own, but it's a lifestyle. It's who we are. We are Christians. We are different and we're set apart. And so it's a part of who we are. And what you're saying, I think is a part of my hope for my own life is that it's not something that, okay, now I put on my Christian hat and now but it's who I am, and that I'm walking out my faith day by day, every day, and that it then pours out of what I do and what I say. And even as I say that, I'm convicted, right? Because I know where I've gone wrong and I have to ask the Lord for help because, I'm a sinner in need of deep grace. So I do think that this is something that isn't just a holiday thing that, okay, we do this, but we want to cultivate this throughout the year. So how would you encourage parents, Clayton, how would you encourage parents to walk this out or these ideas out beyond the Christmas season?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is to give yourself more credit for what you're already doing. I mean, there's a lot of things that we feel very naturally in life that are tensions that we are trying to solve, that everyone, people of faith, people who are Christians are trying to solve. I'm tired and overwhelmed by the pace of life. I don't know what my purpose is or what I am here for. I feel like I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling worried. I'm a little bit sad. I don't know how to break myself out of this. So these things that we naturally feel, we typically are trying to find solutions, some of them more positive than others, in order to help kind of care for our souls. Whether or not you are looking to Scripture and to God in order to do that, we very naturally do that. The example for that would be almost everybody at the end of every night will sit down on some kind of surface, their bed or a couch or the floor even, and just have a big, huge sigh of relief. Like in that moment, we're like incredibly close to reflection and meditation and prayer on the day and inviting God into what we are doing. Most people are going to have dinner conversation. There's a lot of people who are trying to not have screens at the table and make sure they're having meaningful conversation with their entire family. We're incredibly close in that moment in terms of having a spiritual moment with our family. A lot of people will take vacations, and this is taking a break from the cycle of work in order to rest. On the weekend, we feel this need to rest and have an ability to take a break from the pace of the weekdays. That's incredibly close to a Sabbath. And so it's take the things that you're already trying to solve yourself and say, hold on a second, there's a God who cares for me and wants this relief that I'm searching for, wants this more full and abundant life that I'm searching for. And so his plan for these areas that I'm already trying to solve on myself actually probably is going to be better than the solution that I've come up with for myself, right? Does that make sense? Where it's like
Yeah.
there's things that we're already doing that are very close that we need to be intentional to bringing God into them and following his way for those things. But I think that makes it seem more attainable to live a life of faith when you recognize that this life of faith that we are striving for is actually something that we're already decently close to, though in a broken kind of way.
Yes, absolutely. When we return, not only have you done these wonderful Advent blocks, you've also written a book, and I'd like us to dive into that. So more when we return. Welcome back to Living by Faith with Trillia Newbell, and I have been talking about the good kind. And before we move on, Clayton and Chris, could you tell people where they can find your products?
Yes, Good Kind is we help people practice the good kind of habits and holiday practices, and you can find us at goodkind.shop.
Okay, easy enough. Goodkind.shop. Now, you both have also written a book, Building Spiritual Habits in the Home. We've already kind of started to talk about spiritual habits in the home, but and I would imagine that your own building of a company is what inspired this. But could you tell us, how many children do you have? How have you practiced these spiritual habits in your own homes?
So I'll go first, Chris, I guess. We have my wife, Kristen, and I have two girls. They are 12 and 10, Kara and Susan, and they will be very happy that I mentioned their names out loud, and they're going to think they're famous now.
That's fantastic.
I was on the radio? Oh, my gosh. Apparently that means a lot to a sixth grader and a fifth grader.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, how have you incorporated spiritual habits in the home, Clayton? Since you're talking, we'll just go ahead and dive into your home, and then we'll go to Chris.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, a lot of the things that you do find on our website are things that we were trying to solve ourselves first. So table conversation, we created something called the Graticube, and our family uses this every night. This is a way to add variety and gratitude into our everyday table conversations, which if you look at the math of the time you spend in conversation with your family, meals end up dwarfing everything else by like a mile, especially over time. And so that's one of the things that I have done with them. Another thing is taking moments of silence. I'm trying to teach our girls to be quiet before bed, to reflect on what God is doing in their lives, and then turning that into prayer. Because let's be honest, prayer it can be a little complicated. You're talking to someone that you can't see, but is certainly there. And so I think that takes practice. And so at a very young age, I've just started helping them both think about what is happening in their hearts, be honest about what is happening in their life experiences, and then using their relationship with me to actually help them turn all of those experiences and emotions to God so that God can actually lead and direct what they're doing. Now, that sounds much, much more grandiose than it actually is, right? I mean, forgive yourself. You don't have to have a life that is exactly like mine if you were listening today. But it's as small as taking 30 seconds and letting my girls sit and think and then tell me what's going on in the day. And then I use what they tell me about what's going on in the day in terms of our prayer in the evening. So I mean, we just try to be consistent, do very small things, and do them very consistently. That's the strategy that we talk about in building spiritual habits in the home, but it's actually what we're doing at our house as well.
Yeah, small things and do it consistently. That is, I wrote it down. I'm going to remember that. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, my wife Jen and I have two kids as well. They're slightly younger than Clayton's. I've got a 10-year-old daughter named Lottie and a 6-year-old son named Teddy. And like Clayton was saying, I started writing this first Advent guide, and I literally, truly, the way you put it resonated so much for me. I literally was writing these stories and thinking, not how will this work for children, but how would I explain this to Lottie? Like literally, how will I explain this story to her tonight? Because I will be reading this story to her tonight. And that is the genesis of all we do, which is part of why we don't have products yet for middle and high schoolers, because our kids aren't there yet. And we're not solving those problems just yet. We're thinking a lot about how does this work with like elementary age kids. In the book, we kind of boil it down to 6 small steps, that what we call them, for how this actually can work in your home. It's things like make it easy, make it tangible, make it playful. I'll just park there on the playful one. I think this is one that we parents miss a lot when it comes to training the next generation in our faith. We generally know what it means to read the Bible or pray or do these spiritual habits as grown-ups. And we struggle to know how to get a kid to do that. And because they can't do what we do, we feel like, well, maybe we can coach them up on it later, rather than saying, there's got to be a way to do this practice that a 6-year-old can actually meaningfully understand and enjoy. And so that's a lot of what we do in our house is like, let's talk about a Bible story. And if they get stuck on some random detail because Teddy's 6 and he thinks, wow, that was silly that the guy went in the water 7 times.
Right.
Okay, yeah, maybe that was silly. Let's go there. There's such a beauty in their candor that leaning into where they want to go with things is often a very fruitful way to actually make the Bible and spiritual habits interesting, because we want them to care about it. They'll get the formal stuff later. Get them interested, get them wanting to come back by keeping it playful and at a kid level as long as you can.
Well, I do have teenagers. I have a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old, and even as you were talking about dinner time, and we are a very open family. We're constantly in communication with each other, and we love to talk to each other. And dinner times or meals are very important to us. But I've never had a formal resource or something formal that we've done. And I love the idea of the Graticubes. Did I say it right? Graticubes. Did I say it right?
Yep,
okay, good.
Yep.
Yeah, I love that idea, because that is an easy transferable thing to older kids, having not seen all of it. But the idea of gratitude and being able to share those things. So I actually do wonder if some of these resources can be transferred to the older kids. We just have to be a little bit more, we probably have to adjust some things, but that I thought, adding gratitude to the table is something that we all want to do if I understand it correctly. But I love the idea of a 6-step kind of easy, simple, easy to understand, especially since your audience sounds like they are going to be parents raising younger kids. We need easy, don't we?
We very
absolutely.
much need easy. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I mean, yeah, that is the first step that we outline, and I don't know if it's the most important, but we lead with that, very much because it matters so much to all of us. I mean, none of us as parents can overemphasize how much we want our kids to pick up the faith that we believe in and to run with it. And I know there's just so much anxiety around not being able to make that handoff well and what it's going to be like. And goodness, the 21st century and all the things we didn't have to deal with, the new struggles and all that. And when I look to Scripture and I look at the way of Jesus and how he interacted with his disciples, he wasn't talking to the 21st century, but I know he was not surprised by what we're going through. And so when he looks at us, he doesn't say, hey, you better panic. There's a lot of work to do. Get going. Like that's not the tone I hear. Instead, he says, are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you overwhelmed? Well, come to me. And he's the one that used the word easy. He says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And we truly, like you said, Trillia, we want to take God at his word. When Jesus said he had an easy yoke for us, we want to say, all right, if I haven't experienced that yet, I must not yet understand or believe or walk out what he's offering, but I believe it's there because he said it is. And for us as parents, it's possible. It really is. It's a hot mess most of the time, but it can be easier than we make it often.
Well, I mean, I think one of the reasons that it is a hot mess isn't so much that, I mean, our kids, they might be rolling around, they might be distracted. I think it's because of our own hearts and expectations. I think often we come and expect this, I don't know, like super spiritual, Jesus comes in a cloud situation. I don't know. We want it to be so perfect and for the kids to walk away and they have these aha moments. But sometimes it just doesn't work that way. And we have to rest and believe that God is doing a work in our kids. More when we return. Welcome back to Living by Faith with Trillia Newbell. I am so happy to be talking with Clayton Green and Chris Pappalardo, they are pastors, parents, friends turned business partners, and they have a company, The Good Kind, and also a book coming out, Building Spiritual Habits in the Home. Now, this book doesn't release until January, so I want you all to be on the lookout for it. It's a Moody Publishers book, and we want you to grab it, Building Spiritual Habits in the Home. So you can pre-order, you can write it down and be reminded to order it. Also, I believe they might even have a discount for you. Is that correct? Am I dreaming that up? Okay, tell us about that.
Well, not at all. And if you said that, we would just do it anyway, right? So if you go to goodkind.shop, if you want the book, you can pre-order it on Amazon. So you just go on Amazon, Building Spiritual Habits in the Home. We'd love for you to pre-order there. If you are interested in any of our products, Advent Blocks, there is still time to join us. We have express shipping options. There's a great way. We would love for you to join us this year starting on December 1st, but you can always catch up if it's a little late. Goodkind.shop is where you find everything. And if you use the code Moody, there's a special discount for you. So MOODY, special discount just for the listeners today.
That is awesome. So I hope you all will check that out and grab some things, some tools that will help your family to delight in Jesus this season and also build spiritual habits in the home. And that's really our goal and our hope. And really, as I was thinking about spiritual habits, it starts with me, right? I don't want to be a person who says, do what I say, not as I do, or whatever that phrase is, that saying. We know the saying. We know that it is easier to tell someone to do something than it is to actually do it ourselves. And I think about even when I say to my friends, okay, have faith, trust the Lord. And then I turn around and I'm like, anxious about whatever. It is so much easier. But it is so important that I am myself exercising my faith, that I have spiritual habits. How has your spiritual habits, and we can start with you, Chris, how have they changed as you have built these resources and engaging with your kids' hearts?
Yeah, that's such a good question. You saying that makes me think of a verse that Clayton and I come back to all the time in Proverbs. Most of us know it. You train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he won't depart from it. And that first verb there, train, we usually swap that out with teach. Like if I teach them the right things, they'll keep going. But it is a matter of training. And training is something that's caught more than it is taught. Like we have trained our kids at this point without even intending to, that if I dropped off my daughter at Target and told her to go buy some shredded cheese and meet me back in the van, she could do it. I never taught her how, but we did this thing over and over and over and over again, and it trained her to the point where now she intuitively can do it, which is your point. I'm training my kids if I develop the spiritual habits in my own life that I would like to see in them. And if they don't exist in my life, I could talk about how important prayer is all day long, and it's not going to transfer because they're going to watch what you say, they're going to watch what you do, and they will model what you do. So one of the things that I've done, or we've done in this process, is Clayton and I have just been, we call it tinkering or fussing. We're super comfortable with the fact that we try spiritual habits, and sometimes they don't take and it doesn't work, and we have to go back to the drawing board. And I actually love that process with him of saying, hey, I learned about this spiritual practice of sitting in silence. I don't really understand how that works with prayer. What if we tried it like this with this hourglass? We do it for a while, we check back, and we say, worked really well for me, didn't work at all for me. And just giving ourselves the freedom to try a new thing, chat about it with each other, tinker, fuss, and say, well, this didn't work, without it feeling like when I've done it and it didn't work, well, therefore I'm a failure. Because that's, again, we're talking about practice, right? And practice means you do it. Sometimes you're good, sometimes you're not, but it just takes the pressure out. And I'd love being able to do this with Clayton and have that conversation partner to fuss with things we want to grow in.
You know, I love the reminder that we can end up making practices the goal rather than a relationship with Jesus. And so we also have to guard against making a rule, adding to the gospel. And there's something that you said that triggered this thought, and that because I do think that we like to know that we're doing okay. And so I think there's something about that. Chris, are there any ways that, I'm sorry, Clayton, are there any ways that your spiritual habits have changed in your own home?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, what Chris was saying, if I tell my kids to do something, they'll do it once. If I train them to do it, they're going to do it forever. So again, back to easy and small. I think I've made what I try to do on a daily basis smaller so that I am more consistent in it, because I believe if I'm more consistent in it, the likelihood that my girls will follow in the step greatly increases. And so that's one thing, is just continuing to make everything smaller than what it used to be, so that I am more consistent with my spiritual engagement with God. But then also, I mean, I just want to double tap on what Chris said in terms of having a companion on the spiritual journey. That's something that none of our products can provide. Like, you can't go to GoodKind.shop and buy a friend that can talk to you about how to pray. Like,
that's too bad. That's too bad.
Yeah. If we could figure that out, then I mean, things would blow up for sure. But I mean, that God has our relationships with each other. He magically and beautifully made our relationships with each other both life-giving to us, but also helpful to us individually. So, go to GoodKind.shop, but also text a friend and just start a conversation, because having a companion that is willing to and regularly talking to you about your spiritual life is probably the most long-term helpful thing that you can have. And so I think having a friend is probably been the most impactful thing to my personal spiritual life.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. A friend, a companion, someone to lean on. We don't want to do anything in a vacuum. We need community, and that's why we have the church. And I'm so grateful for that. I want to end the show talking about play. It's so important to me because I think often we take ourselves a little too seriously. So how have you incorporated play into your spiritual habits, and specifically with your children? You can start, Chris. Yeah.
Chris, go first.
Or Clayton.
Yeah. One of the things we talk about this in the book is actually just recognizing that if you read the social scientists, what they say about play, it really starts to sound like it's a spiritual habit. People who are playful are more likely to be engaged in their community. They're more likely to be focused and not anxious. They're more likely to exhibit gratitude. And if you look at the laundry list of what play does for people, you say, wait a minute, those almost sound like spiritual fruits, which is maybe overstating it quite a bit. We actually gotten to the point of saying that we are so focused on work as a society that play itself is a form of rest and Sabbath that all of us need. So play is a spiritual practice. And those of us with kids get the benefit of having a nudge in that direction to remind us to do the thing that I think God wants us to. That's one. The other element is just, like I said before, asking ourselves over and over again, okay, in this spiritual habit, what could I do that would invite a 6 or 7-year-old to meaningfully do this with me? And then doing that. So if I'm praying, how can I do this in a 6-year-old way? And then actually doing that with my 6-year-old rather than asking him to get on my level, which is going to drive him nuts. And It means it's simpler. It means it's much more concrete. And we lean into the distractions. And all of that is okay because when Jesus was walking around, he didn't say, all right, bring me the elites who love to have long lectures and conversations. No, he said, bring the children to me. And the kids weren't going to put up with it if he was boring for long periods of time.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Clayton. How can they find you again? Tell us again how we can find you.
You can find us at goodkind.shop. We're on social media and stuff like that as well, but you can find all of that. And so just one place to go is goodkind.shop.
Well, this has been an absolute delight and a joy. And I am praying and hoping that everyone listening will take these ideas and they will take one step, like one thing that you heard today. You obviously, we don't want you to try to do it all. Take one idea and incorporate it into your daily walk. Go find them at Good Kind and maybe grab one of their resources. I'd like to thank my guests, Clayton Green and Chris Pappalardo, for joining me today. Also, thanks to the behind the scenes team at Moody Radio, my producer, Karen Hendren, and my engineer, Merle St. James. To grow daily in your faith, you can tune into my 52 Weeks in the Word podcast. You can find it at moodyradio.org. To hear today's program again, you'll find it at livingbyfaithradio.org or on the Moody Radio app. You can also connect with us through Facebook and Instagram at Living by Faith. Living by Faith is a production of Moody Radio, a ministry of Moody Bible Institute.